Wednesday we talk about the crucified God. Now we're right down to it. We don't have crucifixion in America, but imagine if we did. Violent, naked crucifixion in public. Imagine if we did. For anything the government decided you'd done wrong or was inappropriate, we think, oh, we'll go to jail. Even if you're killed nicely, with the injection or something like that, maybe. But me being a nurse, I wanted to look into this crucifixion stuff, because I don't know how many of you have done this. I hadn't really known what crucifixion was like. You hear it all your life. Let me just read a little bit I found an article called A Physician's View of the Crucifixion of Jesus Christ by Dr. C. Truman Davis. As I wanted a description of the crucifixion. I mean, really, what are we talking about? What did Christ go through for us? And it's kind of long, so I won't go through the whole thing, but it's a little bit like a post-mortem, with a final cause of death kind of thing. And he describes that in those days, the prisoner, the part that goes up and down on the cross stays in place. What they're carrying is the cross piece, and it's 110 pounds. And he goes through this process and the prisoner has to carry that 110 pounds from where he's tried over there to where he's going to be used. Then he goes through the details of they don't put it in their hands because that body it would just come through the hands. The hand's not strong enough. So they would put this big square iron nail right between your ulna and your radius, right here, where is a very tender nerve. And they would do that to both, and then they would take the left foot and put it behind the other one and nail at the ankle there, right between the feet. But he talks about the various things he had to go through, being hit by all these guards and stuff who, they're not going to go, hey, they're going to lay into him by hit and spit on them. And it goes through all these details. It talks about the phenomenon of, they call it hematidrosis, or bleeding sweat, and he points out that is possible. And to people, it's possible if they're in enough trauma. And it talks about of course, the whipping, which has a metal ball at the end. And eventually it gets to the point, he's very descriptive about how all that goes, but he starts with a bruise, ends up with strips of skin tissue hanging off, basically a totally exposed raw back, and so on. And then he talks about the robe they put on, and they put the crown on, and the robe would have stuck to him, all that bleeding, and then they pretend it hit him and all this kind of thing. And then when they pulled the robe back off, all that was stuck to him would have pulled off. It's really too much to read. And so you get the idea that this isn't this is more than I thought. Even, when you look at it forensically, and it talks about how hard it is to be on the cross, because you can breathe in, apparently, but you can't breathe out, just the way the muscles are hung there. And so you're basically partly suffocating. He was in shock, he hadn't eaten, drank, he'd lost all this fluid, and so on, and he was very near death, but he managed to say those 7 last words, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He put in there, today you'll be with me in paradise. We know that from the perspective of people here, we put punctuation in. Punctuation wasn't present when this was written, so people artificially put a comma in. We believe it says, I say unto you today, you will be with me in paradise. Not I say unto thee, today you will be with me in paradise, which is what it's taken. And the reason, just briefly, that he couldn't have been saying that you could be with me today in paradise is because he wasn't in paradise that day. He was, in fact, he said to Mary when he was resurrected on Sunday morning that, don't hang on to me, I haven't yet been to my Father. And so even Christ wasn't in paradise that day, so neither could he have been with Christ in paradise that day. There was no comma. So somebody chose to put a comma where they wanted to put it, to make what they thought was right. But it really was, I say unto you today, you will be with me in paradise. which is more accurate since he will be with him in paradise, but not that day because Jesus wasn't even there that day. So he managed to say these words. He said, "Woman, behold thy son," to John, about John, and John, "Behold your mother. My God, why have you forsaken me?" Talks about what it did to his heart. Apparently, the work of the heart is so difficult that it starts building up fluid inside the pericardial sac, which is the covering of the heart, until it compresses the heart and it can't work very much because the fluid is holding it in. And so he quotes Psalm 22nd Psalm 14 verse, "I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart's like wax, it is melted in the midst of my bowels." So then it talks about him, taking little gulps of air, and finally says, "It's finished." He says, "I think he could barely talk by then. And Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit." And then, in order to keep the Sabbath, the Jews wanted him off the cross. So that was another thing where they usually break their legs because they haven't died that fast. But Jesus had already died, so they poked a spear basically right into his heart. And the Bible talks about, and blood and water came out, showing that, according to this doctor, he died of heart failure. And we say also a broken heart, due to shock and constriction of the heart by fluid in the pericardium. And so that was one of the harshest punishments anyone can mete out. People are cruel when nothing stops them. Read the Fox's Book of Martyrs if you want to be horrified by what people can do. Well, you don't need that even. You just look at the news, The one thing that really struck me before we go is that Matthew 27:51 says, it was dark that day. That was another thing that happened. The curtains were torn from top to bottom, and also the earthquake happened what caused a lot of holy people to come alive. Well, then I read in Matthew 27:51 and 2 that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. We all pretty much hear about that. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. Then bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. But verse 53 says they came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection. I'm thinking, so they came back to life when he died, but they didn't come out of their tombs until he was resurrected? I found that really interesting. I figure, this is pure speculation, that some angel must have been in there with them while they were in their tomb waiting and explained the deal to them. But they came out afterwards. And quickly, the one thing I probably object the most to in the Sabbath school lesson is, on this Wednesday, was Jesus on the cross suffered a righteous God's righteous indignation against sin, the sins of the whole world. So I want to just consider that statement. What is the real punishment for sin?